Yo, what's up guys, Alpha here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to hit rank 1 with on the Arena ladder. As you can see from the screenshot here, I'm currently 23-3 with this deck, so it's been performing really well for me. And now before I get into it, there's going to be an MTG zone link down in the description. If you click on that, it'll have the full deck list there that you can import into Arena if you want to try the deck out for yourself. And I'm also in the process of writing a full text article about this deck for MTG Zone Premium that will have more details, a full sideboard guide, how I changed the deck for best of one, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So as soon as that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description as well. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my blue-white control deck in Historic. Now, I've been trying blue-white control in Historic on and off for a little while now, and it just hasn't really felt well positioned because it really has a bad matchup against both Rakdos and Jund Midrange and Goblins, both of which are really popular decks in the format. So I've been trying to come up with a build of blue-white control that really helps to improve those matchups, and I feel like I've finally come up with a build that does that, whilst also just generally improving the consistency of the deck as well. So there are two main innovations in this deck that I'm really excited about. First of which is change the equation. So I think one of the big problems with blue-white control in Historic for a while now has just been a lack of good 2-mana counter spells, and I think change the equation from the latest set is probably the best 2-mana counter spell that we've had access to since Memory Lapse. So this is just generically good across the board game one, right? Being able to counter anything with mana value 2 or less covers a lot of bases, you know, even if the opponent isn't playing a red or green deck. Every deck in Historic is going to have cheap permanents, right? It's a very fast format, so the majority of decks are going to have really good targets for this. A lot of the non-red and green decks in the format are Lurrus decks. You know, you've got the Auras decks, you've got the Artifact aggro decks and Auras, so this hits basically every card in that deck outside of Lurrus. And then the fact that this hits more expensive red and green spells as well is absolutely huge and really helps to improve those two matchups I was talking about. So first of all, Rakdos and Jund Midrange, the fact that this stops all of the opponent's proactive 3-mana plays, even when you're going second, you know, stuff like Crucius, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Seasoned Pyromancer, and Jarsil is really, really huge. And then it also hits their 2-mana plays like Bloodtithe Harvester, shuts off their discard spells as well, so really, really helps to improve the Jund and Rakdos matchups. And then it's also just really good against Goblins as well, right? It hits basically everything in their deck outside of Slinggang Lieutenant, and siding against Goblins with control was always quite difficult because they're a deck with a bunch of cheap creatures, so you typically want to be running more creature removal and sweepers rather than counter spells, but because of Muxus, you really need to be running a high density of counter spells, and Change the Equation is really good against both their cheap creatures and Muxus as well. So Change the Equation is such a big addition to the deck and just feels like a really good 2-mana counter spell. Now, I do sideboard this out against creature decks or just, you know, decks in general that aren't red or green that tend to have more expensive spells, but even in those matchups game one, there's a ton of good targets for this to hit, so this is such a big addition to the deck. And then the second big innovation to the deck that I think helps out a lot in terms of consistency and also improving the Rakdos and Jund Midrange matchups is running 4 Memory Deluge and 30 lands, which might seem like a lot, but this has been a real improvement in consistency. So I think consistency in blue-white control, the big sticking point from my experience is the mana base, because missing land drops with control is such a nightmare, right? If you miss your 3rd, 4th, or sometimes even your 5th land drop so you can't cast a fairy, you start falling behind immediately. If you get choked on mana, you know, the idea with this deck is you interact and then you start snowballing the game with your card advantage spells, and if you get stuck on mana, you really can't snowball the game once you've interacted with the opponent. And so the main way that blue-white control tries to go about fixing this issue is with card selection spells like Memory Deluge. Now, typically blue-white control lists do run some numbers of this, but it's typically not higher than 2 because it's 4 mana, so if you are relying on this to find you land drops, you need to naturally find your 4th land in order to do so. So typically, most blue-white control lists will run maybe 1 or 2 copies of Deluge, if that, and then they'll rely on cheaper card selection spells to try and find lands in the early game. So that could potentially be something like Consider, that gives you card selection, or sometimes interactive spells that also cycle, you know, stuff like Censor or Shark Typhoon, so that if you are missing land drops, you can just cycle them away to try and dig towards lands. But the issue with those sorts of cards is if you're forced to interact in the first few turns, which, you know, you're playing Historic, if you're not interacting on turn 2 or 3 with control, you're probably going to fall behind really quickly. But if you are interacting on turn 2 or 3, you don't get an opportunity to use those cycling spells, so you can be left in a situation where, you know, you keep a hand with 2 Censors, for example, and you have to use both of them as counter spells, and then you just don't draw lands and you don't have a way to dig towards them. You know, I think Archmage's Charm is a good card that highlights this as well, because in previous builds I've been in situations where I pass with 3 mana open and Archmage's Charm, but I don't have my 4th land yet, and so if the opponent casts something that I want to counter, I'm in a really tough spot where I either have to counter the spell and just pray that I draw a land off the top, and if I don't, I just start falling behind because I'm choked on mana, or I let the spell resolve, use the Archmage Archmage's Charm to draw towards more lands, and then just I have to figure out a way to deal with that permanent later in the game. So neither of which are ideal. Now, the easy solution to this is just to run more lands, but the issue with that in most builds of Control is you start to run into issues where you flood out, particularly against discard spells, right? If you keep a hand with 3 or 4 lands, some interaction, and a Teferi, for example, if the opponent Thought Seizes away the Teferi and then you just draw lands off the top, you really can't capitalize on your early interaction, and so you'll just end up running out of gas, basically. But the reason that we can afford to increase the land count in this deck is because Memory Deluge specifically is so good at mitigating flood. I think this is just by far and away the best flood mitigation, and I don't even think there's really a close second. And the reason this card is so good at mitigating flood is not only does it produce card advantage, but it has really good card selection as well. So the first time you cast this, you look 4 cards deep. So even if you have a ton of lands, looking 4 cards deep is basically guaranteed to find you something good. And then not only that, but we can flash it back for 7 mana later, and when you flash it back for 7, you get even more card selection. So not only does Memory Deluge basically guarantee that you never run out of gas, but it actively wants you to keep curving out until your 7th land as well. So running 4 Deluge alongside 30 lands is a really nice setup because it basically means that we can freely interact on turns 2 or 3 without needing to worry about missing land drops, because we're so likely to keep hitting land drops with 30 lands. And even though, flood can be an issue when you're running such a high land count, because we're running 4 Memory Deluge and 4 Teferi, which are such good flood mitigation, that's never really an issue. So it really improves the overall consistency of the deck, and also provides good card advantage, which is really good in the grindy attrition-based matchups. Speaking of which, this is also the card that is just the best against Rakdos and Jund midrange. So the 3 main ways that you beat Rakdos and Jund midrange from the control side is by top decking well, by having enough lands to play what you draw off the top, and by not mulliganing. So Rakdos and Jund midrange is a deck that always operates by going 1-for-1, right? Their discard spells go 1-for-1, all of their removal goes 1-for-1, and in this specific matchup, discard spells are the most important thing from their point of view. So typically, especially post-sideboard, the opponent is going to have a ton of discard spells. They're going to have Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Duress, Liliana of the Veil, and so they're going to be picking apart your hand in the early game. And so the way to capitalize on that is to, try and capitalize on the weakness of discard spells, which is that they're very good against cards in your hand, but they can't stop cards that you draw off the top. So the way you beat Rakdos and Jund midrange is by running a bunch of cards that can get you back into the game once you draw them. And Memory Deluge and also Teferi are cards that are really, really good at doing that. Like I said, Rakdos and Jund is all about going 1-for-1. And so any card that can produce 2-for-1s or card advantage is really hard for them to deal with. And Deluge and Teferi, not only produce card advantage, but they also give you card selection, so they're good at finding you sweepers, even if the opponent's managed to commit to the board early. So we have a very high density of cards that are very good to draw off the top to get us back into the game. We've got 4 Deluge, 4 Teferi, Archmage's Charm, Wandering Emperor, and Kalima also really good to draw off the top. So if we can draw these cards, then that is just a way for us to get back into the game and recover really nicely from discard spells. Now, the other important thing is that we need to be able to cast what we draw off the top, and this is why going up to 30 lands is also really good against Rakdos and Jund as well, because, say we get stuck on 3 lands, even if we do draw a Memory Deluge or Teferi off the top, we're not able to cast it, and that just plays perfectly into the Rakdos and Jund midrange game plan, because they can then just snipe these cards from our hand with their discard spells. So running 30 lands basically ensures that we keep curving out in terms of our land drops, so that if we do draw a Memory Deluge or Teferi off the top, we're able to cast it and then just get straight back into the game. So a high land count is really important to combat against discard spells as well. And then the third thing, not mulliganing, is really important, because if you mulligan against a discard spell heavy deck, then you're starting with fewer resources, and if they're trading 1-for-1 with discard spells, it's way easier for them to just leave you running on empty very early on. And so because we're running 30 lands as well, it basically means that we can confidently keep any hand that has 2 or more lands, and then we can be confident that we're going to keep drawing lands until our 4th land drops, so that then Memory Deluge and Teferi off the top are live. I'll pretty happily keep a 6 or 7 land hand against Rakdos, because it basically just ensures that we can cast whatever we draw off the top, which is really important. So Deluge, I hope I've explained this well. Deluge and 30 lands not only improves the consistency of the deck overall, but it gives you a really good way to recover from discard spells against Rakdos and Jund, which was probably your most difficult matchup, and the reason why Control hasn't really been popular in the format for a little while. The other final really nice thing about Memory Deluge is it also enables us to run very efficient interaction like Soul Partition and Divine Purge that doesn't deal with the targets permanently. So these are both cards that are incredibly efficient for their mana cost, but the downsides of them is that the opponent gets access to cast the spells that you target again later in the game. Now, typically that's not normally an issue, right? If you can go Soul Partition or Divine Purge and then resolve as Teferi and start ticking up, if the opponent starts casting their 2 drops for 4 mana or their 3 drops for 5 mana, you're normally pretty happy about that, and you're just going to win the game at that point because the opponent is being so inefficient with what they're doing. But you're not always going to have a Teferi, and so with previous builds of the deck, I would sometimes run into issues where I would use these on the opponent's permanents, and then I didn't have a Teferi to capitalize on that, and then that would give the opponent time to start recasting the stuff from exile and then start applying pressure again. But that's kind of mitigated by running 4 Memory Deluge. 4 Deluge, 4 Teferi basically guarantees that you never run out of gas, so you can use Soul Partitions and Divine Purge in the early game to exile the opponent's stuff, and then, like I said, you basically never run out of gas, so you're always going to have Deluge or Teferi to capitalize on that situation so that you don't end up in a situation where you run out of gas and the opponent can just start recasting stuff from the exile, if that makes sense. So looking at these cards more a bit closely, so Soul Partition, just the most efficient interaction we've got. 2 mana, exiles any permanent or any non-land permanent, which is huge. So creatures of any size, but also artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers as well, very importantly. So this just acts as early interaction. The only real comparison to this we've got is Fateful Absence, and that only kills creatures. It doesn't kill planeswalkers or artifacts or enchantments, and it also leaves them a clue token, which is a lot more easy for the opponent to use, right? It's much easier for the opponent to have 2 mana spare at some point and draw a card than it is for them to spend their entire turn casting a card that's been taxed by 2 on this, if that makes sense. So this is just really flexible. The other card that is kind of comparable to is March of Otherworldly Light because of the exile, but I'm not really a fan of March. I just feel like it's really inefficient in general, right? Because especially if you're going second, you oftentimes need to exile a card from your hand in order to kill a creature on curve, which is a bit awkward, whereas Soul Partition just being able to deal with anything is really huge. And then, like I've said, Deluge basically ensures that we can always maximize the advantage that we get from exiling stuff early. And then Divine Purge is just an incredibly good sweeper, basically the best card against all the artifact decks, like the Affinity decks, the Lurrus versions, the Hammer Time deck as well. And it's just also really efficient against other creature decks as well, right? This being 3 mana is particularly important against the creature decks that tax you, like the Esper Sentinel and Thalia decks against humans, for example. So Purge is just the most efficient sweeper that we have access to. And then between Soul Partition and Divine Purge, we have answers to basically creatures of any size. And then, like I said, we never really have to worry about being in a situation where we run out of gas and the opponent can start recasting stuff off this because we have 4 Deluge, 4 Teferi. And then we've also got Archmage's Charm. So this is just, one of the most flexible cards in control. Between Archmage's Charm and Change the Equation, we have access to a ton of counter magic, which means we're really strong in the mirror match and also against combo decks, which is really nice. The flexibility to draw to is also really great on this. If we're in a situation where both players are kind of at a stalemate, we can just use this to start pulling ahead, which is really nice. And then the ability to gain control of a non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less is also really good in certain matchups as well. Particularly good against the Retrofitter Foundry decks because we can use this to steal the Foundry itself, the 4/4 token, stuff like Esper Sentinel as well. So absolute all-star card, really, really flexible. Now, we do have to make some concessions in the mana base to consistently be able to cast this on turn 3, but I definitely think it's worth the payoff for sure. Then we got a couple copies of Wandering Emperor, so this is really great as additional removal. It also provides us some incidental life gain, which is really important because in this particular list, we don't have any other ways to gain life outside of Wandering Emperor, so we do generally need to be quite wary of our life total, but the fact that we do get incidental life gain off this is nice to kind of somewhat mitigate that. And then it also acts as just a way to commit to the board and start turning the corner and closing the game out as well. Now, this particular list is really good at turning the corner because we have 4 Kaleem and 3 Hall of Storm Giants as well. So between Wandering Emperor, Kaleem and Hall, it's very easy for us to just start, putting the opponent on like a 2 or 3 turn clock out of nowhere, which is really nice. So Wandering Emperor has been nice as a 2-of. You could potentially look at running the 3rd copy if you wanted to, but I don't really think there's room in the current build. And then we've got 4 copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. So, if you've played against Control and Historic, you know how this card works. It just completely runs away with the game, acts as a win condition in and of itself, and then the -3 acting as an answer to any permanent is really nice as well. But like I said, this just snowballs the game, and between Deluge and Teferi, it's really, we basically always have ways to capitalize off our early interaction, which is huge. And then the last card in the deck we've got here is Kaleem Jin Emperor, which I'm a huge fan of this card. So it basically acts as early interaction that also draws us a card, so keeps the card flowing. You know, between 30 lands and Kaleem and Archmage's Charm, we're basically, you know, very, very rarely going to run into situations where we do miss land drops, which is so important. You know, like I said, I think the biggest way you just lose to variance, even if the opponent doesn't have a particularly strong start, is missing land drops, and Kaleem is really good at helping you dig towards it. And then once you've done it 3 times, you get to bring it back as a creature, which, like I said, is very good at just closing the game out very quickly. You know, one of the issues if you're just relying on Teferi to close out the game is it does give the opponent a lot of draw steps, and Kaleem just instantly puts the opponent on a 4-turn clock straight away, and is just a really big blocker as well. So this is really nice. It also, you know, kind of gets around certain protection effects, like Thalia, for example, that attacks all of our spells. Doesn't stop this because it's an activated ability rather than a cast trigger, which is really nice. So Kaleem, really, really powerful as a threat and also early interaction. And then in terms of the mana base, like I said, I'm such a big fan of 30 lands alongside the 4 Deluge. I definitely wouldn't go lower, or you will run into some situations where you draw a couple of Deluges and you can't cast them. Because we are running 30 lands, that does mean that we do have quite a lot of slots for utility lands. I think Hall of Storm Giants is just the most important utility land in the whole deck, because it allows us to just turn the corner really quickly. You know, Hall of Storm Giants in combination with Kaleem and Wandering Emperor allows you to just put the opponent on a 2-turn clock out of nowhere in a lot of situations, which is really powerful. Then because we've got Archmage's Charm, the vast majority of the lands do produce blue, so that we can have triple blue on turn 3 consistently. So the other utility lands we've got here are Otawara and Castle Vantress, which are both blue. Otawara is just basically free to run and is very useful. You know, acts as a interaction for basically any problematic permanent, and then Vantress, the scry on this is also really nice. And then even though we do need triple blue on turn 3, I'm also running 3 Field of Ruin, and typically I'm not a big fan of running Field of Ruin in a deck that's also running 4 Archmage's Charm, but because we're running such a high land count, we can afford to run Field of Ruin and still have enough blue sources. So, you know, we've got 30 lands, 3 of which are Field of Ruin, which means we have 27 lands that produce blue, which is more than enough to consistently have triple blue on turn 3. You know, a lot of control decks only run 27 lands in total, so the extra Field of Ruins aren't an issue with Archmage's Charm from my experience, and I do feel like Field of Ruin is very important in this deck because the interaction suite that we run isn't good at dealing with creature lands. So the annoying thing about Soul Partition and Kaleem is that they both specify non-lands. So if you're up against a Rakdos deck and they have stuff like Den of the Bugbear or Hive of the Eye Tyrant, it's very hard for us to stop the creature lands attacking unless we have Wandering Emperor. So I feel like Field of Ruin is really important, or the deck is just too soft to creature lands. And then there are a number of other lands that this is good at stopping. You know, Castle Lochthwain is a card that's very good against us. I've seen a few Nykthos decks lying around as well. And there's also a number of domain decks that aren't running many, if any, basics at all. And if they are, you can then use Field of Ruin quite aggressively to cut them off mana, which is really nice as well. But Field of Ruin mainly here as a way to shut off creature lands, which are quite soft to otherwise. I just quickly edited in something that I forgot to say in the main video. So in the gameplay that I got coming up, in the very first match, I'm playing a slightly earlier build of the deck where I'm running some more utility lands in place of Field of Ruin, stuff like Castle Ardenvale. You can actually see in that match that creature lands are an issue, so I'm definitely happy swapping those utility lands for Field of Ruin. I definitely think that this is a really important part of the deck. So anyway, back to the video. And then the rest of the lands are, you know, mainly blue-white jewels. You know, we not only do we need triple blue on turn 3, but we also need double white on turn 3 as well. So we do need a decent number of white sources. So mainly just got blue-white jewel lands. Irrigated farmland is really nice at cycling to give us some more protection against flooding out. And then we need a few basics to enable both Glacial Fortress and Castle Vantress, but overall I've been really happy with the mana base. I do think Field of Ruin is important, and like I said, I think 30 lands is so important at enabling Deluge, at enabling us to interact in the early game, and not having to worry about using our card draw spells to find land drops, which is really important. And then onto the sideboard, we've got 3 copies of Rest in Peace, so this is here predominantly for Is It Phoenix and Kethis combo and Reanimator as well. Now 3 copies might seem like a lot, especially because Rest in Peace does have diminishing returns on drawing multiples, but in those matchups I listed, I think Rest in Peace is just the most important card. If we can get a Rest in Peace in play, we basically shut off the most impactful plays from the opponent, and then we can just carry on with the rest of our game plan. So Rest in Peace is just the card that you want to find the first copy of as consistently as possible. So I think 3 copies is good. Drawing it in multiples is a bit annoying, but against a matchup like Kethis combo, if they're relying on something like a Perseju to shut off your Rest in Peace to get their graveyard back online, drawing it in multiples there isn't actually that bad. And because we have such good card advantage off Memory, Deluge and Teferi, it doesn't really matter if you draw it in multiples because you can just dig for other stuff off your Deluge and Teferi anyway. Then we've got 2 copies of Supreme Verdict as additional sweepers, so this is obviously going to be good against the creature decks. The fact that this can't be countered is going to be important against blue creature decks like Merfolk to stop them countering it off their Hexcatcher or their Spell Pierce, for example. And, there are just a lot of go wide aggro decks where you'd want to have 6 sweepers post sideboard. And additionally, there are going to be some creature decks that aren't running green or red. So in those situations, we normally board out of Change the Equation and then board into Supreme Verdict and March of Otherworldly Light. Speaking of which, March of Otherworldly Light just gives us some additional spot removal when we need it. So against the creature decks, we have access to a couple of extra sweepers and a couple of extra spot removal spells to go alongside Soul Partition, Wandering Emperor and Kaleem. And even though, like I said, March can be a little bit inefficient, it's particularly good against the artifact decks because a lot of their stuff is very cheap, right? We can use this for 1 mana to take out the 4/4 token off Retrofitter Foundry. We can take out Esper Sentinel for 2 mana without, or I guess 3 mana without giving them a card. And very importantly, we can also use this to take out their artifact lands for 1 mana, which is really, really huge in the early game. But just in general, this is good at giving us extra spot removal, not only for creatures, but also for artifacts and enchantments as well. Then we've got some extra counter spells. We've got 3 Davin's Veto, 2 Mystical Dispute. So against the control mirror match, we do have a number of cards in the main deck that aren't particularly good. Divine Purge on the most part is pretty bad. And Change the Equation is also not great in that matchup as well. We can use it to fight on the stack against their cheaper counter spells, but it doesn't stop Archmage's Charm. It doesn't stop any of their Planeswalkers. So we typically want to cut Change the Equation there. But we do still want to have a high density of counter spells against them. I do like the 3-2 split. I think Davin's Veto is definitely the better card in the mirror match, but Mystical Dispute is also very good in other matchups against blue creature decks as well. So stuff like Is It Phoenix, Is It Wizards, and Merfolk, this is very good against as well. So I like the 3-2 split here because Mystical Dispute does also have applications in other matchups as well. And we've also got 3 copies of Shark Typhoon, so again, this is very good in the mirror match. We do need a high density of cards to bring in for stuff like Divine Purge and Change the Equation. And Shark Typhoon, giving you creature tokens at instant speed, is really good at applying pressure in the mirror match that is very difficult for the opponent to interact with. And then it's also nice because it's just a generically good card in control that we can bring in if we don't have enough stuff to bring in from the sideboard. So in matchups where I bring in Rest in Peace, for example, I board out the Kaleems because Kaleem is just not very good with Rest in Peace. But we do want just another generically powerful card to bring in to replace them. So Shark Typhoon, good in the mirror match, good when you need flyers, and also good if you're boarding out stuff and just need something generically good to bring in as well. So that's the deck overall. I hope I've explained it, but I really feel like this build addresses a lot of the issues that controllers had in the past. I feel like Deluge and 30 lands really improves the consistency, and I feel like between Change the Equation and Memory Deluge, the deck really improves against both Rakdos and UW Midrange and Goblins, which have felt like the matchups that were really holding this deck back in the past. And then you have really good matchups against a lot of the other decks in the format. So I feel like this deck is really well positioned right now, and it's been a ton of fun to play as well. So anyway, next up I've got some gameplay so you guys can see the deck in action. If you've got any questions about the deck at all, definitely let me know in the comments. And next up I've got 4 matches that I was playing on the ladder. I've only got 4 this time because it is a control deck, so the matches were longer than usual. But either way, let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, and I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, so we're on the play here, and yeah, this hand looks good, right? We've got early Change the Equation, we got Memory Deluge and Teferi as well, so just debating what we want to lead on here. I mean, I think I'm going to lead on the Glacial Fortress, just so that we can potentially have double white on turn 3 for Divine Purge, because that is going to be relevant in certain matchups, because if we lead on the Hall of Storm Giants, then in order for Glacial Fortress to enter untapped, we'd have to play Island first. So doing it this way around, we only really get punished if we draw another Hall of Storm Giant. So I think it's worth going that way around. So opponent leads on Thought Season. They take the Change the Equation, which is a little bit sketchy because it basically means we don't have any early interaction right now. And it looks like the opponent's on Rakdos Midrange here. So really happy to see no 2-drop where we don't have interaction. If we can get to, the next turn and go for Deluge, there's a good chance we get back in it. Going to set stops during the opponent's turn here just so that it doesn't give away that we don't have anything here. So Seasoned Pyromancer is a little bit annoying, especially if they discard 2 non-lands here. Getting a bunch of creatures on the battlefield does mean that we probably have to dig towards Divine Purge to stabilize, especially if they play another creature. Thankfully they only have 1 token though, so only taking 3 damage every turn here, which isn't a big deal. And we do have Deluge here to dig for stuff, and 2 Teferis, so I'm pretty happy about this spot. If they had a Bloodtithe Harvester on turn 2 in addition to this, we'd be under a lot more pressure, but we could use the Deluge to dig towards a Divine Purge. Okay, so they go for another Seasoned Pyromancer here, so Divine Purge is definitely the card that we're looking for the most off this Memory Deluge here. Have to see how many non-lands they discard though. If they discard 2, then we basically really need to dig towards Deluge. But the nice thing about having 2 Teferis in hand is I didn't really mind playing 1 to divert the damage away from our life total, right? The opponent has to focus down the Teferi, and then hopefully that'll buy us more time to try and find the Divine Purge here. Okay, so we'll run off the Deluge. Don't find the Divine Purge, which is a little bit annoying, but we do find Wandering Emperor and change the equation here, which I don't mind. So, oh wow, okay, we drew the Divine Purge off the top, gas. So now we can purge the board, and we have changed the equation up here as well, which is really nice. So if they go for a Crucius or another Seasoned Pyromancer, or even a Fable, we can counter it. Now, I guess Shieldred would be a bit of a concern if they have that, but, you know, we have Teferi that can tuck it, we have Wandering Emperor that can exile it if they attack, so, you know, obviously that Divine Purge was a great draw, but even if we hadn't found that, I think Wandering Emperor is good at stabilizing. We could have potentially gone Teferi plus, forced them to attack down the Teferi to divert the damage away from us, which would have drawn us a card and bought us some time, so... But yeah, we'll have to see what the opponent has here. Really hope they don't have their 5th land, because then that shuts them off using Den of the Bugbear. Okay, they go for Seasoned Pyromancer again, which is great for us. So we can go for change the equation here. And now we can resolve Teferi. And even though they do have Den of the Bugbear, you know, even if they do attack with Den of the Bugbear, Teferi survives at 1 loyalty. And they basically have to spend their entire turn doing that as well. So, okay, we don't find another land, but I think that's fine, right? We have both Kaleem and change the equation available here. So, I mean... Even though Kaleem is generally good against creatures, it not being able to hit Den of the Bugbear or creature lands in general is a bit awkward, so I have been tempted to replace some of the utility lands with Field of Ruin to counteract that, because the deck does feel quite soft to creature lands specifically. Okay, Dreadful Darkness, I mean, we can obviously counter that with change the equation, but I honestly don't think we really care, particularly with Kaleem in hand, right? We can tap it down. We can also just exile it with Wandering Emperor next turn if we do tap it down. They try and Molten Impact the Teferi. I think we will counter that, though. Because they could obviously finish it off with Den of the Bugbear. They could finish it off with Bone Crusher, Giant Stomp. They could finish it off with a second Molten Impact. So, I think keeping Teferi high loyalty also means that we can potentially win... Well, we can threaten winning off the ultimate, which means that the opponent really has to go out their way to start attacking it, which is good for us. So, I didn't go for Kaleem last turn because... I wanted to be able to use it to tap down the Dreadful Darkness this turn. Now, I'm going to go for the Wandering Emperor here just to make use of the mana before we untap with Teferi. But thinking about it, you know, maybe it's better to use Memory Deluge instead and hold the Wandering Emperor to exile Den of the Bugbear. Because currently we are a little bit soft to the creature land, particularly if they have a removal spell for the 2/2 here. Okay, they Spiteful has the Wandering Emperor. So yeah, thinking about it, maybe I was supposed to go for Deluge there. I definitely think it's worth doing something in order to make use of the Teferi untap mana, but either way, we can tap down the Arcanist here. I don't mind getting the 2/2 in play because they can still animate the Den here before attacks, and we have the 2/2 to trade with the Den of the Bugbear. So it looks like opponent is... Okay, they did consider going for the Den, but chose not to. Okay, Croxer is a little bit annoying here. I think we'll discard the Deluge while we have a second one in hand, and we can obviously cast it from the graveyard, right? We're at 6 lands, so we're only one land away from being able to flash back the Deluge, and then the opponent can escape the Croxer, which I think I'll probably discard the second Teferi to this. And Croxer is a little bit annoying for sure, but, you know, at worst, we could just tuck it with the Teferi that we've got in play if we wanted to. I mean, obviously, we'll see what we draw off the top, but, you know, at worst, we just go Teferi down to 3 loyalty, tuck the Croxer, and we could potentially make another token of Wandering Emperor to protect Teferi from Den of the Bugbear as well. So they do escape Croxer, which makes sense. Definitely going to pitch a Teferi here. And, I mean, we could also potentially just plus the Teferi and Deluge. Okay, drawing Kaleem is perfect, because now we have a way to tap down the Croxer to stop it getting the attack trigger, which is huge. Oh, okay. And we also draw Divine Purge, so... I think that's definitely the line here, right? Get rid of both the Arcanist and the Croxer in one go. We do lose the token, but I don't think that's really a big deal. And then I'm just going to use the Wandering Emperor to make another 2/2 here, just to, you know, stop the opponent's Den of the Bugbear being able to attack down the Teferi. And now we're approaching 8 loyalty. They really have to try and focus on killing the Teferi here, which means they're probably going to have to make some riskier lines in order to do so, which obviously, you know, plays perfectly into our game plan. Okay, opponent goes for Thoughtseize. I think I'm going to Deluge in response here. Or, I mean, there's definitely an argument to letting it go, but I think I'm going to Deluge in response here. And, you know, then it makes their Thoughtseize less impactful. Definitely think we want the 7th land to then enable these Deluges in the graveyard, and also gets the Hall of Storm Giants online as well, which is a potential way that we can start turning the corner as well. So tricky pick on the Thoughtseize here. 3 very good cards in our hands. Okay, they go for the Wandering Emperor, which makes sense. I guess that's the best card against their Den of the Bugbear, which is their kind of their main avenue to kill Teferi at this point. So we can plus the Teferi here. So yeah, this Castle, I mean, Castle Odenvale has been reasonable in testing, but I think I'm probably likely to swap this out for Field of Ruins, because I have been struggling against creature lands, so that has been a change I've been considering for a while. And I think if you are going to make room for Field of Ruin in this list, I think you do have to cut any non-blue lands that you have, so that you still consistently have triple blue on turn 3 for Archmage's Charm. So I think opponent is kind of forced to go for Den of the Bugbear here. Or we just ultimate with Teferi. But if they don't have a Fatal Push here, we can soak up a lot of the damage with this 1/1 token. So again, unfortunately, we can't tap down Den of the Bugbear with Kaleem. I'd love if you could. It would make us a lot less soft to creature lands. I thought it would definitely tap down the Arcanist here, start them getting value off their graveyard. And then... yeah, I'll let them attack first before going for the Kaleem, just so they don't have additional information. So presumably attack down to Teferi with both. Since we have the Divine Purge in hand, I'm definitely going to use the token to soak up more of the damage off the 3/2. You know, we could potentially trade with the 1/1, but I'm pretty sure we're going to go for Divine Purge next turn, which is just going to deal with the 1/1 anyway. And then we can cycle the Kaleem here, and I believe that's the 3rd copy, so we can get the Kaleem back from the graveyard. And now, you know, we can potentially start turning the corner very quickly here, right? Opponent's at 16. We also have the Hive, sorry, not the Hive, the Hall of Storm Giants here. Yeah, okay, opponent just scoops it up. So we were definitely really far ahead there. And then, honestly, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm pretty happy with how the main deck is set up against Rakdos and Jund Midrange. I don't feel like we really want to sideboard anything out here, right? Change the Equation is really good here, as is Archmage's Charm. Deluge and Teferi are 2 of the most important cards at recovering from discard spells. Divine Purge is really good against them as well. Now, it doesn't hit Shieldred, but, you know, a lot of the early aggression that they put on is stuff off their, you know, Bloodtide Harvester, Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, Crucius, Seasoned Pyromancer, and Divine Purge just sweeps all of that up for very cheap as well. So not really anything that I want to cut in this matchup. So yeah, kind of mad to have a build where you're basically pre-sideboarded against the Rakdos and Jund Midrange match, but that's kind of how it feels when I'm playing this build. So we basically never want to mulligan against Rakdos, so I'll basically keep any hand that has at least 2 lands so that we can confidently, you know, keep curving out lands and cast what we draw off the top. So they Inquisition away to change the equation. Okay, happy not to see a Bloodtide Harvester. I mean, obviously another Thoughtseize isn't great, especially if they have like 3 discard spells, but the way we win this matchup is just drawing stuff off the top, right? The weakness of discard spells is that they can't, you know, unlike counter spells, they can't stop what we draw off the top. And so we just want to have lands to be able to cast what we draw. Definitely going to cycle away the farmland because we have more than enough lands here. Okay, Archmage's Charm is a nice one, so we can potentially use that to steal the 2/2 token. I mean, obviously if they cast something pre-combat that we want to be able to counter, then I consider that, but they're more likely to attack with the 2/2 first, and I think I am quite incentivized to take the 2/2 here, because we do want to deal with this token. We don't want to start letting them get ahead on mana, and this also poses a threat, because I very much doubt they still have Fatal Pushes in against us, so us getting mana off the 2/2 is also going to be an issue. Now, if they do cast a Crucius or a Shieldred here, that is a little bit of a concern, but we have the Ottawara as a way to deal with it. Okay, they changed the equation, so... and they have Arcanist, which is a little bit annoying because they can use it to flashback the discard spells, but we do have Ottawara as a way to bounce it, potentially. So I think I'm going to attack first here. Well, I think I'm definitely incentivized to bounce the Arcanist so they can't just get value off the discard spells. I'm going to attack first here just in case they have Fatal Push, right? They might let us attack if they think they can block. So I'll attack first, bounce the Arcanist. Now this does open up the possibility for the opponent to attack with the Hive of the Eye Tyrant and exile the Memory Deluge, but we have a second one in hand, and if they want to spend their entire turn doing that, I'm pretty happy about that, to be honest. So we'll see what they do. I think they're quite incentivized to run out the Arcanist here anyway, because otherwise they're not really going to get much use out of it at all, right? They really need to start using the discard spells before we're empty-handed. So I think here I'm going to Memory Deluge main phase just to see what we hit, just in case we find the piece of removal to allow us to more cleanly attack. So I think with enough lands in hand, I'm kind of incentivized to just go Deluge and Archmage's Charm, but I don't know. I feel with, they're basically guaranteed to Thoughtseize here, so because of that, I think I'm more incentivized to just get a utility land here. And, we're basically guaranteed to lose this Deluge to their discard spell, and at least if we get this Deluge, we'll have it in the graveyard, and we're very close to being able to flash it back because of the excess mana that we're getting off this 2/2. So while we could have gone for the Archmage's Charm as well, I don't think we're going to be able to cast both of them. They Thoughtseize away the Deluge here, and then had we taken the Archmage's Charm as well, they probably just take that instead. I mean, maybe that's wrong. Maybe there's an argument to keeping both the Archmage's Charm and the Deluge here, because although I was thinking that they would copy the Dreadhorde Arcanist, so they could have potentially go copy the Arcanist, attack with both copies of the Arcanist and use 2 discard spells, in which case taking the Archmage's Charm and the Deluge is just kind of a waste, if that makes sense. So Unlicensed Hearse is kind of scary because that does mean that we're, they cut off 2 of these Deluges here, so we're basically forced to main phase this Deluge, but I think that's fine. Oh, wow, okay. That's a nice draw. So now we can attack with the 2/2, get another treasure token, crack all the treasures to cast the Purge, which then means that even if they recast the Hearse, it'll enter tapped. I mean, this does open up the possibility for them to attack with the Hive to exile the Deluge. So there is definitely a potential argument to main phasing the Deluge here, just so it doesn't get exiled by the Hive, but that then enables them to copy Seasoned Pyromancer with Reflection, which draws them 2 cards, which I just don't think is worth it. And to be honest, the opponent's been taking a lot of damage, and we have got 2 Hall of Storm Giants in play, so even if they do spend their entire turn next turn going Hive attack to exile the Deluge from our graveyard, we can just start then attacking with the Hall of Storm Giants, and it's going to be really hard for them to race that, I think. So going around the Castle Ardenvale here. Unfortunately, we don't have an island or a plains in play, so that's going to enter tapped. Okay, they do attack with the Hive, so that does, prevent them from developing for a turn, which is pretty huge. Even if we don't find an untapped land here, we can start activating the castle. Oh, interesting. Okay, we drew a Kaleem off the top, so I think we just hardcast that. Like I said, opponent's already down to 12, so I think we can just start racing here. All of the permanents that we've exiled with Divine Purge are going to enter tapped. They do have a Crucius, okay, and an Arcanist, so that's not a bad way to recover from them, but I still think we can just start applying pressure here, right? They're definitely on the back foot. Oh, wow, okay, I was going to say we can just start firing up the Hall here. Maybe it's still right to fire up the Hall, but I think I want to deny the card filtering off Crucius. But either way, we put them down to 7 here, so they're dead to an attack from Hall, so they need to have blockers in play here, basically, or we can just win next turn. Even if they do get blockers on the ground, okay, Seasoned Pyromancer is a good way for them to get blockers on the ground, and they discard a Croxer, which is a bit rough, but even if they do glum up the ground here a little bit, we're still putting them on a 2-turn clock in the air here. So we get to put them down to 2, and it's going to be hard for them to kill Kaleem. I think the only card they could draw here to get them out of this is Shieldred's Edict, potentially, because I don't think they have anything else that would be able to kill Kaleem. Wow, nice way to go out from the opponent. But yeah, sweet, we managed to get there, nice. That felt really good. Okay, so we're on the play here, and yeah, happy to keep this. We got early interaction, we got Archmage's Charm and Deluge to, keep digging for stuff if we need. Divine Purge is obviously really good against creature decks, and we have, I think, 19 white sources in the deck, so chances of us finding another white source on turn 3 is very high. So opponent needs on the Bloodtithe Harvester. Definitely going to snap off change the equation here, because we've got hopefully Archmage's Charm next turn. Wow, we missed the 3rd land drop, so I don't know the odds on that, but with a 30 land deck, that is so unlikely. Typically one of the strengths of running a 30 land deck. Wow, we missed the 3rd land again. Okay, that's so rough. Yeah, like the odds of missing your 3rd land in a 30 land deck are so low. Like I think this is the first time since I've gone up to 30 lands that this has happened. That this is definitely just bad variance, unfortunately. Wow, missed it again. So yeah, that was just. I mean, that's going to happen occasionally. I'm going to have to check the odds from a Frank Carsten article, but chances of that are so low. You know, that's the only time I think playing this deck since I've gone up to 30 lands where I've kept a 2-lander and not found at least my 3rd or 4th land on curve. So just going to have to chalk that one up to bad variance. But in terms of sideboarding, like, I feel like the main deck's already very well set up against both Rakdos and UW Midrange. You know, there's nothing I'd really want to cut. We want the Divine Purge to deal with their early creatures in case they can force them through. We have tons of good top decks. Deluge and Teferi are just two of the best cards in this matchup for sure. So yeah, I really like how the main deck's set up against these mid-range decks. So gonna lead on the Deserted Beach here. I mean, that does potentially mean... Okay, sweet. We found another white land. So actually, thinking about it, I should have definitely led on the Glacial Fortress. That was my bad. I think I was just distracted because I was talking. But yeah, leading on the Glacial Fortress means that we can go Hall and then Deserted Beach to potentially cast Divine Purge on turn 3 if we need. But on the play, Divine Purge isn't really something that we're super interested to play on turn 3. So nothing for the opponent in the first few turns is really great to see, right? We don't have to worry about interacting with the board, which then enables us to go for either Emperor or Deluge this turn, which is huge. So opponent does go for Graveyard Trespasser, which is a little bit annoying here, because we can't cleanly deal with that with Wandering Emperor, but I think I'm still... We could flash in the Emperor and plus. I think I don't mind that, because we can go Emperor plus, go for Divine Purge, and then still have mana open for Change the Equation. And this is kind of another spot where, you know, Change the Equation is not only great on turn 2, but it also enables us to go for these lines where we can sweep the board here so we don't have to pay the ward on Trespasser and still have Change the Equation up in case they try and go for like a Fable or a Crucius or a Seasoned Pyromancer here. Wow, Invoke Despair. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, thankfully, this isn't the worst Invoke Despair because, you know, it basically draws them a card and kills the Emperor and the token, which isn't the worst. You know, had we had a Teferi out, they get to draw 2 and hit the Teferi. That's even worse. I mean, we found another Deluge, though, and a Soul Partition, so we have interaction for anything they play, and Deluge is just going to be really good at pulling ahead here as well, I think. So go for Inquisition. I think we just want to snap off a Change the Equation here because we don't want to give them the option of potentially taking whichever is more impactful. And they do have a City Stalker, so we'll definitely go for Deluge here. Not the best hit, but we can go for Divine Purge to protect the Soul Partition, and then hitting a Field of Ruin here is huge when they have... Well, now they have 2 creature lands, it's even more important. But now we have access to the Deluge from the graveyard, so even though they managed to strip our hand pretty well this game, Deluge is just going to be able to completely refuel us. Like, this should hopefully highlight how good Deluge is at recovering from discard spells. I mean, I'm very tempted to counter this, but I also think I really want to Deluge here as well, because we have so much mana here that if we hit Teferi and, you know, something good, we can then potentially just go to Teferi and protect it fairly effectively. We have the Field of Ruin here already to be able to hit their creature lands. So I'm just going to snap off the Deluge here, see what we hit. So no Teferi, but we do have Deluge, Archmage's Charm, and Soul Partition. I think I like going for Deluge and Archmage's Charm here. And then Archmage's Charm is going to be able to stop, you know, any future Invoke Despairs. Or we could even use it to steal the 2/2 here, if we really wanted. And the nice thing about having Field of Ruin open here is it basically just means they can't fire off a man land. Now, Mutavault being cheap to activate does mean they could potentially activate the Mutavault to try and bait us out using Field of Ruin and then activate the Hive. Since Archmage's Charm is the only way we've got of stopping more expensive black spells like Shieldred and Invoke Despair, I think it's better to use Soul Partition on the 2/2 rather than stealing it with the Archmage's Charm. They go for Inquisition, we can just counter that with Change the Equation. And then if they don't cast anything else that impactful, we can just go for Deluge here, which is going to be pretty huge. They do still have this Graveyard Trespasser hanging out, but again, you know, not too worried about that. We can just snap off the Archmage's Charm on that. Okay, they try and go for Shieldred, so very happy that we held on to the Archmage's Charm. Wow, and we drew the Teferi. Okay, sick. So now we got Teferi plus Deluge, which is really nice. And we obviously have the Field of Ruin to shut off them attacking with creature lands. They do have Shieldred Edict, which is a bit annoying, but, you know, we still get to draw a card here. You know, we're still up on that exchange, basically. So how many lands have we got here? So I think it doesn't really make a difference whether we go for Hall or Hallowed Fountain untapped, because, you know, we wouldn't have mana to go for both Field of Ruin and Memory Deluge if we play an untapped land here, I don't think. Or maybe we would. Hold on, maybe I've misplayed this slightly. So if we have an untapped land, yeah, I think we would have done, actually. I mean, I don't think it's going to end up mattering here because they're not going to fire up the Mutavault by the looks of things. So they're attacking with the City Stalker. We'll definitely fire off the Deluge, and hopefully we can find, you know, Sub-Partition would be nice as a way to exile the Shieldred without needing to take damage off the draw step trigger. Interesting. So I think we... Divine Purge... Actually, no, Divine Purge isn't even that good here because it doesn't hit City Stalker or Shieldred, right? So I'm just trying to count up the amount of lands I've got here. So I think we go for Teferi and Wandering Emperor. And then we draw for turn. Okay, so we go down to 7. So this is kind of sketchy. Definitely going to play an untapped land here. And then I think I'm going to go Teferi. And then we kind of have to minus on the Shieldred here, or we're just taking too much damage. And this does put the opponent in a spot where, you know, it's risky for them. Well, they kind of have to attack Teferi down with multiple creatures here. Oh, well, they got Go Blank. I mean, we can just flash in the Wandering Emperor here, so... And they use 3 mana, so that means they don't have mana for Hive as well, which then protects the Memory Deluge. Oh, no, wait. The Memory Deluge in the graveyard gets hit by Go Blank anyway, but if they can't fire up the Hive, which means they can't, you know, guaranteed kill the Teferi here without attacking it with multiple creatures. Okay, they do fire up the Mutavault. Interesting to see how they attack here. You know, presumably they attack Teferi with 2, Wandering Emperor with 1. But I don't really mind that because... Oh, wow, they keep the Reflection back. We're definitely going to exile the City Stalker because Reflection looping City Stalker can basically just deny us our draw step every single turn, which is obviously a big deal. While they attack down the Emperor, they must have another Shieldred's Edict in hand then, or... Yeah, okay. So Teferi dies, unfortunately, but... we can potentially start attacking with the Hall of Storm Giants and just racing here. So we do draw a Divine Purge, which deals with the Reflection. And, you know, Reflection copying Seasoned Pyromancer off the top, or potentially Trespasser is definitely an issue for sure. Okay, they cast Fable again here. Wow, they fire up the Mutavault. That's pretty aggressive. Wow, okay. So we could save this Archmage's Charm for the Shieldred, but I think I prefer stealing the 2/2 here because that then enables us to attack, puts them down to 6, and then if they cast the Shieldred here, they basically have to use it to chump block the Hall of Storm Giants. And using the Archmage's Charm here, I mean, I guess, you know, because they can't... they can't use the Mutavault to block because we have Field of Ruin and enough mana to activate it. So, you know, while it's very tempting there to save the Archmage's Charm for the Shieldred, using it to steal the 2/2 is much, much better here because it forces them to chump block, basically. You know, unless they happen to find... Even a Fatal Push here wouldn't do it because they can't pay the ward. So yeah, we have exactly enough mana here to activate Field of Ruin as well. So if they do try and activate the Mutavault as a way to block, we can just kill it with the Field of Ruin. Now, unfortunately, we then will be 1 mana short of casting Archmage's Charm as well. But we're not facing down lethal at all. And with the attack from the 2/2 as well, that puts them down to 4. So they basically just have to keep creatures back to block here. And because of the Divine Purge, the Fable is going to flip into a tapped Reflection, which means the Reflection can't even block next turn either. So, and additionally, because of the Divine Purge, the Graveyard Trespasser that's in exile will also enter tapped, so that can't block. So, if they don't draw a creature here, they basically have to hold back this Hive of the Eye Tyrant to block, and I believe they don't have enough mana here to activate both Hives. I think they're 1 mana short. Yeah, they're 1 mana short here. Wow, they're activating Hive. I feel like that's a mistake, right? They have to keep the Hive back to block. Maybe they're just realising that, though, because they've kind of paused. I mean, if they attack, we just win the following turn. Yeah, this was a super close game for sure. But these, the Hall of Storm Giants, just absolute MVP here. Because they can fire up the Hive to try and block. we can Field of Ruin it in response. Yeah, so they did mess up there. They could have not activated that Hive, which would then enable them to activate Hive to block. We Field of Ruin it, and then they could have activated the other Hive to block, which would have bought them another turn. I mean, I still don't know whether that would win them the game or not, because we still have mana up for Archmage's Charm at that point. But yeah, that would, I think starting to get aggressive with Hall of Storm Giants, particularly if the opponent is trying to disrupt your game plan, is a really good way to just turn the corner in games. So again, really don't want to mulligan at all against Rakdos if we can avoid it. And so, I'll basically keep any hand with at least 2 lands, and this hand is really good. We've got, lands all the way up to 4. We've got Change the Equation and Soul Partition. So if they don't cost anything this turn, I think it's very tempting to use Soul Partition to exile the Harvester just to keep them off board. But I think I'm going to hold on to the Soul Partition here just in case they have Shieldred, right? Change the Equation is nice, but it doesn't stop Shieldred. So I like holding on to Soul Partition here. I mean, okay, now we draw an Archmage's Charm. If I'd known I was going to draw the Archmage's Charm, I would have Soul Partitioned the Blood-Tithe Harvester just to get it off the battlefield. But that turn we didn't know we were going to draw Archmage's Charm, so holding Soul Partition for Shieldred makes more sense, I think. But now I feel pretty good about this spot, right? Blood-Tithe Harvester is a reasonable clock, but not that fast. Okay, we're forced to use Archmage's Charm here. But we still have Soul Partition for Shieldred. We still have Change the Equation for Crucius and Fable. Now, them having Invoke Despair could be a bit rough here, but that's not typically a card that's running very high numbers. It's also kind of risky for them to go for, because if we have a counter spell, they just spend their entire turn doing nothing. Wow, they missed their 5th land drop, which is quite big, because that means that we don't have to worry about Hive for now. Okay, Teferi is a very nice hit, and then I think, I'm actually kind of tempted not to go Teferi on this board, because I feel like the opponent has a Shieldred's Edict, right? They must have interaction of some sort for them to not develop any more to the board. So I feel like Teferi is super vulnerable to Shieldred's Edict. So I think I'm actually going to go for Wandering Emperor and Kaleem and not Teferi, which might seem kind of mad, but I don't mind that line, because I feel like Wandering Emperor, I'm not too worried about Shieldred's Edict with the Wandering Emperor, because, we're going to get value off the exile or the token. So if they do Shieldred's Edict, at least we've got something off that at that point. I'm going to play the land in tapped here, because I don't want to... Okay, they go for Kolaghan's Command. We're definitely going to counter that. But yeah, I want to play the land tapped while we get the opportunity here, because having the untapped land, the 5th untapped land, doesn't really open up any more possibilities to do with plays. And, saving our life total is very relevant, particularly if they're running Bone Crusher Giant. They do have City Stalker here, so we don't have great counterplay to that. Thankfully, since Kaleem is, expensive, that's going to be the card we lose instead of Wandering Emperor, which is pretty important. And thankfully, that does go to the graveyard for us to, potentially get back the Kaleems if we draw the 3rd copy. Now, using Soul Partition on a City Stalker Connoisseur generally isn't the best idea, obviously, because they can recast it later in the game, and make us discard another card, but they're stuck on lands. We know that, so they would need to draw 2 lands for them to do that. And so that's so far away that I'm really not too worried about it. So they attack with the Harvester. I'm going to flash in the Emperor here and exile it. We gain a bit of life back as well, which means that, we don't have to worry as much about Bone Crusher Giant or Shieldred potentially draining us out. And we can do this fairly freely because we still have Change the Equation up here. So we could have used Change the Equation to protect the Emperor here, but... and my read on that was right. Okay, so I'd much rather use Change the Equation on Viconia here, because that can potentially exile the Deluge. I mean, we do have Divine Pledge for it, but they could potentially be sandbagging another land to, trick us, play a land, and then exile the Deluge. And Deluge is going to be really important here. But yeah, now that I have seen that they had Shieldred's Edict, which was kind of my read, it doesn't really make sense for them to not commit more to the board if they didn't have cards like Shieldred's Edict. I'm kind of glad that I didn't go for the Teferi earlier. But either way, we can just go for Deluge here, which should hopefully, refuel us, hopefully find a Teferi or potentially that 3rd Kaleem, which could be pretty important. Okay, so use Trespasser. I mean, I was going to say there is an argument to using it on Deluge, but I think they're much better off going for Kaleem instead, because that just slows us bringing back the Kaleems. Okay, we've hit a Field of Ruin and a Kaleem, which is great. Now we don't have to worry about the Hive, which is really important. We can go for Divine Purge here, gets rid of all of their blood tokens and their 2 threats as well. And then just going to ship it back here. And we do, you know, we can potentially bring back Kaleem from the graveyard off the next one, which is pretty huge. Okay, they go for City Stalker. So I think at this point I'm happy to fire off the Field of Ruin first. Maybe we could wait on that, but I'd rather do it now while we don't have like double spell stuff that we'd want to do. And then I'm going to channel the Kaleem in response to tap it down, just in case we draw a Wandering Emperor in the next couple turns. Now, it will force us to discard a non-land if we do draw it, so we will lose the Soul Partition, but we get the Kaleem in play here, which is pretty huge. And even though we're definitely low on the life total race, you know, I think we can still attack here because we've taken out their hive, so we don't need to worry about that on the crackback. Oh no, we've misplayed. So I definitely should have channeled the irrigated farmlands before playing the land for turn, because that could actually end up being very costly. Because if we play the Hall of Storm Giants this turn, we can potentially attack for 12. And so if they play a shock land or we draw a Wandering Emperor, that could potentially represent lethal. So that was a huge misplay on my part. If I'd known that, well, I did know that I was going to cycle those farmlands, I definitely should have cycled the farmlands before I played my land for the turn, because not having this Hall of Storm Giants in play could be very costly. We'll have to see. So the opponent does play the Graveyard Trespasser, which is definitely a concern here for sure. Can potentially get them some life back. So it looks like they're going after creatures in their own graveyard, which makes sense. Puts us down to 5, puts them back up to 15. We'll Deluge here. Okay, so what do we want here? We definitely want one of the Kaleems. I think I'm just going to go for both Kaleems here, to be honest. I think, you know, the way we win here is we attack them down to 10. Then we can tap down both of their creatures and potentially attack with the Hall plus the Kaleem next turn for lethal. And we can pay the war tax on the Trespasser because we drew a land here. Okay. So they do have a Fable, which is obviously a blocker, right? And they have the Harvester as well. So I think what I'm going to do here is tap down the Trespasser, which is important to not only keep this Deluge around, but also stop the opponent from dealing us any more damage off the Graveyard Trespasser triggers. And then I hope that the opponent attacks with the Connoisseur, because if they do, we can then use this second Kaleem to tap down their 2/2 and go for lethal with Hall of Storm Giants next turn. So it looks like they're going for it. Oh no, they didn't. Okay, so they didn't fall for the bait, unfortunately. Thankfully, we've got the Deluge here that we can activate again. I was sick. We found a second Kaleem, so that should do it, right? Just trying to think what else we want to get alongside it. So I think Archmage Charm, or maybe we want the Wandering Emperor instead. Oh, no. Oh, okay. That was a misclick on my part. I meant to... Oh, that was so annoying. I meant to unselect the Archmage's Charm and pick Wandering Emperor instead. So, I mean, we can still potentially... Hold on, let me count up the mana. Oh, we're 1 mana short. So we're 1 mana short of going steal the 2/2, tap down the City Stalker and fire up the Hall of Storm Giants. So, hold on, let me just check again. 2, 3, 6... Yeah, so we're 1 mana... so obviously what I meant to do there was take the Emperor and take the second Kaleem, and then we just go tap down the 2/2, tap down the 3/3, attack with the Hall. Just let me check again. Yeah, so we're 1 mana short. That's... yeah, that was a really annoying misclick on my part. Either way, I think unless the opponent draws something good here, we should... you know, we should still win, because we can go during the opponent's turn, steal the 2/2, tap down the Trespasser with the Kaleem, and then use Wandering Emperor to exile the City Stalker or the Bloodtithe Harvester. But we give them extra draws here, right? If they find a Shielded Edict, we basically just punt the game through that misclick. So I'm really hoping that didn't end up mattering. Okay, they activate the castle. That's a good sign, right? But if they find a Shielded Edict, we're in real trouble. Okay, Inquisition, that's fine, right? We can just use fire off the Archmage's Charm now, steal the 2/2, and then both the other cards in my hand are basically immune to Inquisition. And then, unless their last card's Shielded Edict, I think we're good here, right? They go to combat, we tap down the Trespasser. Okay, phew, we got there, even with the misclick. Okay, so we're on the play here, and Yeah, I mean, we have got a lot of lands, but I think I'm still happy to keep this, right? We've got Change the Equation and Soul Partition as early interaction, and then we have a ton of cards that we can potentially draw to help us refuel. Now, speaking of which, right on cue, Memory Deluge definitely being one of them. Now, double Hall of Storm Giants does potentially mean that we might struggle. You know, if we cast Divine Purge, we can't cast it immediately. If we draw Divine Purge, we can't cast it immediately, but don't think that's going to be an issue on the play here. Okay, so against Goblins, which, you know, has previously been a tricky matchup for control, but I feel, particularly with the addition of Change the Equation, that really helps this matchup a lot. So definitely want to counter the Snoop there, because if that's in play, that's just going to potentially start snowballing an advantage otherwise. Basically a must-kill threat in this matchup, so very glad that we managed to tag it with a counterspell there. Now we could have gone... Oh, okay, they flashed a Munitions Expert, that's not a big issue at all. We could have potentially gone for Soul Partition instead, but we would have basically been forced to counter the Snoop when they recast it anyway, so... Although having said that, you know, there is definitely an argument to holding on to Change the Equation for one of their more impactful goblins, especially like Muxus. Okay, so Battlecry Goblin, that is something that I'm more happy to use the Soul Partition on. You know, at this point in the game, they're only 2 lands away from Muxus, and I think holding on to Archmage's Charm for the Muxus is really important. So I think here I'm just going to fire off the Deluge. We do want to Soul Partition... Oh, perfect. Okay, we get 2 Change the Equations. That's so good. But yeah, like, we definitely want to deal with this Battlecry Goblin before it can start activating, but thankfully we're going into a turn with 5 mana here, so we can Soul Partition the Battlecry Goblin and then still have mana up for Archmage's Charm here, which is huge. I mean, doesn't really make a difference now we've got to Change the Equations, because that also works, but, you know, if we hadn't found this Change the Equations, we still could have gone for that. Okay, that's a pretty good play from the opponent, because they see that we have Field of Ruin tapped, so we can't activate the Field of Ruin this turn because we held that mana for Archmage's Charm. Actually, thinking about it, I probably should have... Okay, that's a good draw. But I was thinking about it, I probably could or should have used 2 blue mana. Used a blue and a white mana for the Soul Partition and then hold open Field of Ruin, because we still would have been able to activate Change the Equation. Still would have been able to cast Change the Equation there. So I don't want to run out the Teferi here, because they could very easily just fire up Den and kill it. I would rather wait until we can untap with mana open to both counter and activate Field of Ruin as well. I'm going to use the Archmage's Charm here instead of the Change the Equation, because... You know, I'm going to try... I basically, at this point in the game, we're not worried about what the opponent has on board, so we're... You know, I don't think we're likely to ever want to use that Archmage's Charm in order to in order to draw 2. And since Change the Equation basically counters everything in their deck, I would rather just hold on to them. And they're just much more mana efficient, right? Because we used Archmage's Charm last turn, we can be able to use 2 Change the Equations this turn, which could be important. So this is... annoying, because if I use Change the Equation here, the opponent can just fire up Den of the Bugbear and kill the Teferi, which I really don't want. If we let the Ranveld Hordemaster resolve, then even if they attack with the 2/2/2s, the Teferi still survives here. So I think now they've tapped out of being able to activate Den of the Bugbear, I'm happy to fire off Change the Equation on the Pashalik Mons here. And then even though they can put the Teferi down to 1 loyalty, wow, they just ignore the Teferi. I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense in a way, but I mean, I'm quite happy to see that, because I don't think they're going to be able to force lethal through, particularly with this Otawara here. So with the second Kaleem on top, I mean, there's potentially an argument to cycling the Kaleem now just to make better use of the Teferi untapped mana. That does mean that we can't tap down both of their creatures, but I basically plan on using Otawara to bounce the Hordemaster here. And so I'm not really concerned about their 2 creatures, to be honest. Right, at best, if we bounce the Hordemaster as they go into combat, they're only going to be getting in for 1 damage. If they try and fire up the Den, we can use the Field of Ruin, so... So, we could potentially use Change the Equation here to counter Fable, but if their last card is a Muxus, that's a real nightmare. And I think we can deal with Fable here, right? We have a lot of good draws. You know, Divine Purge here is particularly good, and we have a lot of ways to find it. We also have the Kaleem back as a blocker, so I'm not too worried about this Fable at this point. I think the main thing I am worried about losing to is Muxus, so I'm going to hold on to this Change the Equation for that, basically. then we can use the Kaleem to tap down one of their creatures. We're definitely still going to bounce the Horde Master here. Okay, nice. We found a Deluge, which is pretty nice as well. So we'll let them attack first to see where they attack. Okay, they just go face, so that's fine. We can just bounce the Horde Master here, reduce the amount of damage they've got in play. So we only go down to 6 here, which isn't a big deal. Oh, okay, Divine Purge is perfect. So we'll lead on plussing to Fairy first here. And even though we've used Field of Ruin, you know, they obviously have a second Den of the Bugbear, but we can just hold back the Kaleem to block here. Now, we could, you know, potentially start attacking, but I think that's so greedy, particularly against a deck like Goblins, where they could be running stuff like Chieftain. But yeah, I feel pretty good about this spot, even though we are at a fairly low life total. Wow, okay, that's a tricky one, because it's basically a must-answer threat, but they could very well have Muxus in hand. I mean, I think I just have to counter this and hope they don't have the Muxus. I feel like they probably would have played it already if they did have it. And I don't think we can afford to play around both, right? At this point in the game, we can't really afford to let Snoop resolve here, because if they happen to hit well off the top, that's going to be a real nightmare. So I'm going to Deluge in response here because they're tapped out. There's no real risk to doing that. Okay, and now, you know, even though I am kind of worried about Muxus still, I think I'm happy to snap off a counterspell here just because we represent ultimating here. So they basically have one draw step here to find Muxus, and we can also main step the Deluge here and try and dig for another counterspell. Okay, perfect. We find one, and we also get a Wandering Emperor as well. So that provides us with protection from Den of the Bugbear if we need it. Now, unfortunately, we don't have enough mana to do both. Right, we can only do Archmage's Charm plus Kaleem or Wandering Emperor on its own. But if they invest a ton of mana into Den of the Bugbear, then they have got Munitions Expert as well. Okay, so at least we know their whole hand at this point. So we could counter this. You know, it puts the Teferi down to 4 loyalty. And is also obviously a good target for them to copy with Reflection as well. So, I think I'm going to counter here. And then they're basically forced to attack the Teferi. You know, we can tap down the Horde Master here. So they're basically forced to attack down Teferi with the Den. And then we can just kill the Den cleanly. Now, they do get a trigger off the Horde Master for when the Den of the Bugbear dies. But, you know, that's kind of unavoidable at this point. So we'll block the Den, and they no longer have access to a creature land. So just got to hope they don't hit too well off the Horde Master here. Oh. Okay, that's a bit of an issue. I mean, thankfully, again, we have the Deluge in the graveyard. Oh, okay, sweet. We drew another Archmage's Charm anyway, so that's not a concern. So because we drew the Archmage's Charm, we don't have to do the Deluge anymore. So now I'm pretty happy to just go Wandering Emperor and exile the Horde Master. And now they don't really have good options to copy with Reflection. And again, you know, definitely don't want to attack with the Kaleem. We're trying to win this game with the Teferi Ultimate, basically. Okay, they go for Muxus. We're obviously going to slap off an Archmage's Charm here. And then if they try and copy the 1-1, I think I'll just exile the 1-1. Yeah. Now, that could be risky if they draw another good Goblin off the top, but we get so many draws here. We also have the Memory Deluge in the graveyard still, so I'd be very surprised if they managed to win this. Yeah, okay, sweet. We found another Archmage's Charm, so basically no way for the opponent to win this now. Getting Teferi back up to 8 loyalty, so no matter what they draw here, we're going to win. They can't attack with the Reflection. Might as well make another token just to be sure, but we can counter anything they draw off the top. We can block the Reflection with the Kaleem, so I think this game should just be locked up unless they're running some, you know, Chandra that can't be countered in the main deck or something weird like that. So yeah, we should be good to win this one. I very much doubt they're ever going to be able to beat the Teferi Ultimate. So Skirk Prospector, yep, that's completely fine. They just ship it back. Yeah, okay, opponent just scoops it up. So, yeah, that felt pretty good. Going into sideboarding, this is quite interesting because we do want to keep a decent number of counterspells in for Muxus, but we also quite like creature removal for their early creatures as well. So, Supreme Verdict seems quite appealing here, but it's hard to know what to cut because I do want to keep a decent number of counterspells to be able to stop Muxus. I think we can afford to trim a Deluge in this matchup. I don't think I would ever go below 3 though, because it is such an integral part of this build of the deck. And then We could consider March of Otherworldly Light as well, but honestly, I think I'm just going to run it back, right? Divine Purge is really good. You know, we didn't see any creatures that cost 4 or more. Now, there's obviously, you know, a very good chance that they might be running Sling Lieutenant or Krenko, but we have Soul Partition for them, so I think I'm just going to run it back as is. We got 5 sweepers, which should be pretty good, and I really want to keep a high density of counter spells, because Muxus is just the card I'm most scared of in this matchup. So this is a bit of an awkward hand, but we do run, I think, you know, nearly 20 white sources, so the chance of us finding one, okay, perfect. So I think we should lead on the Glacial Fortress here, just so if we do draw an untapped white-blue dual land, we can go Divine Purge on turn 3, potentially. Okay, perfect. We do draw another white, you know, untapped white land. Definitely going to Soul Partition the Snoop before they can start playing off the top of the library. See what they got on turn 3 here. So yeah, Snoop is just a thing you have to answer straight away. Okay, they got Hearse, which again, I'm not really too fussed about at all, right? It does, you know, stop Kaleem, does exile the Deluge, but we can fairly easily beat Hearse. And it also gets hit by Divine Purge, which I imagine we'll use at some point, right? There's a chance they might just play the Snoop here. Interesting. Okay, so they go for Fable. So I think, you know, I mean, it depends what we draw off Kaleem and for the draw step, but I could potentially see just going for a Divine Purge here, because we really want to deal with that 2-2, you know, because otherwise we risk giving them access to Muxus mana next turn, which is, you know, way too risky. And going for a Purge here, you know, not only deals with the 2-2, but also gets rid of the token. Okay, now we draw into Fairy. That's even more incentive to go for the Purge here, I think, because, you know, if they don't have a really strong follow-up next turn, we can potentially just go to Fairy Plus and hold up Soul Partition for whatever creature they have. Now, having said that, we will be going into the opponent's turn 6 when we cast Teferi, so if we end up not having a counterspell going into that turn, that could be could be a little bit rough. Okay, we found another Divine Purge, so I think I'm just going to roll that out again, and, you know, opponent only has 1 card in hand, so if that is a Muxus, they need to hit a land off the top. If it isn't a Muxus, then we don't really need to worry. So they do flip into Reflection. And they do have a Battlecry Goblin, which is definitely a threat. Now, they can activate it to give Reflection haste to presumably copy the Battlecry Goblin, so we definitely want to exile the Battlecry Goblin in response before they can copy it. Presumably, they still get in for 3 here, but that's not really much of a big deal. And then Divine Purge giving the Battlecry Goblin, making it enter tapped is really huge, because it means that the haste ability really doesn't do all that much. Wow, and we found Change the Equation. Okay, perfect. So now we're actually defended against Muxus, which is really huge. But yeah, I feel pretty good about this spot now. They do have a lot of stuff in exile, but it's so expensive for them to cast that I don't think it should really end up mattering too much. Okay, they go for Snoop, so they could still have a Muxus in hand and just not found their 6th land. But again, Snoop is just a card you have to answer immediately, so definitely going to do that. And then we get to untap with Teferi here, which is really huge. So going to lead with plusing on the Teferi, then I think we'll probably main phase the Deluge here just to make use of the Teferi untap. And I was going to say try and find counter magic, and we find 2 pieces. Now, we would ideally like some more lands, but I think at this point in the game, counter magic is so much more, you know, impactful, because they've just got a Reflection in play, which doesn't do anything unless they can resolve another creature. And if we can just keep countering everything, then we're just going to get to keep ticking up with the Teferi and running away with the game. Wow, they go for Goblin Trashmaster. Interesting. I guess that's to stop potential Grafdigger's Cage. Now, we could go for Archmage's Charm, but I quite like going for Change the Equation and then tapping down the Reflection just to save the damage on Teferi. And then we also potentially dig us closer towards another land, so then Archmage's Charm being 3 mana isn't as much of an issue. Okay, sweet. We found another land and another Deluge, which is really good. So between Deluge and Teferi, we're constantly finding gas here, which is really useful. Okay, and we found a Field of Ruin, which is nice. So if they play a Den of the Bugbear, we have the answer straight away. Interesting. Okay, now we've got an extra land. I think I'm happy to just get both Kaleems. And now I think we're 1 Kaleem away from just being able to get it back from the graveyard straight away, which is really nice. And we still have the Archmage's Charm up as well. Okay, they go for the Hearse, which can get rid of the Deluges, but at this point we're so far ahead on card advantage that I don't think that matters. We're also, you know, going to be able to get the Kaleems back before the unlicensed Hearse untaps. You know, Divine Purge making everything into play tapped is so sick here. So we get to tap down the reflection. Oh, okay, I was wrong. So we needed one more clean to get it back. But either way, it doesn't really matter. I knew we would be able to get it this turn. So even though the Hearse can exile the Deluges, we still get to get the clean back, which is the main the most important thing here, I think. Wow, and we drew another Divine Purge. So I was potentially tempted to use the Emperor to get rid of the reflection here, but now that we drew Divine Purge, that's even better. Now we actually get to keep the Memory Deluges as well. So then we get to untap here, and I'd be very surprised if we lost this game now. We have Archmage's Charm, which I think I'm going to be saving for Muxus, because that's the only thing I'm really worried about losing to here. And then we've got Emperor, we've got Deluges, we've got Kaleems to tap down their stuff, and Teferi's getting close to ultimating again. Plus, we can freely attack, right? We've got both Kaleem and Hall of Storm Giants to apply pressure, so... And actually thinking about it, I think we might have lethal here, right? We can go Wandering Emperor, make a token, which is 7 power, plus the +1/+1 counter is 8, plus the 7 from Hall of Storm Giants is lethal, so we can just go for lethal now. Right, we can plus... Yeah, okay, opponent just scoots up. Sweet, that felt really good. Okay, so we're on the play here, and yeah, I think we can keep this. You know, we've got early interaction, we've got Clean to help dig for lands if we need, got Purge and Deluge, so... okay, turn 1 Esper Sentinel, never really happy to see with control, so hopefully it's not humans. I'm much happier if it's an artifact deck, obviously with this double Purge here. I'm going to run out the farmland on turn 2 here, just because... You know, we could go for Kaleem, but I think we're more interested in having 3 mana open for next turn. Okay, so we are against an artifact deck, and... Okay, opponent. Even though, you know, you never really want to give the opponent the free card off Sentinel, I really feel like it's worth just jamming Purge here, because not only do we get to clear their board, which they are, you know, committing quite a lot, but we also get to get rid of their land as well, and, you know... Getting to essentially Stone Rain the opponent and get rid of their whole board is huge. You know, that one turn has already put us so far ahead, so... Yeah, very happy to be against an artifact deck with the 2 Divine Purges in hand, obviously. Okay, sweet. So, you know, drawing an untapped land here is really nice. We can now jam Emperor or potentially Deluge if we want to. Okay, they go for the Ornithopter here, sure. So, since they chose to play the Darksteel Citadel, which I'm kind of surprised about, I think I prefer going for Wandering Emperor here. And then they don't have access to mana for Rebuke, so we can pretty cleanly go for Divine Purge again here, which, you know, oftentimes you might want to wait until they've developed a little bit more, but because we get to tag a land here, that's so important. And like I said, because the Ornithopter's entering taps here, they don't have mana for Metallic Rebuke, even if they use the Retrofitter Foundry to make a 4/4. So I think we go Emperor plus, and then Divine Purge again. And even though, you know, there is a risk definitely going for Divine Purge when the opponent has like a fully stacked hand, but this is going to get us so far ahead in terms of tempo that I think it's probably worth it. Okay, another untapped land is nice because now we can go Purge and also use the Kaleem to get a card deeper as well. Don't want to get screwed over by the auto tapper though. Want to represent having white mana. Even though we don't have a white card in our hand, it's worth representing here. We don't really lose anything by doing that. So we get to Purge again here, then we can start making tokens off the Wandering Emperor, and then, you know, we've got Deluge to try and find Teferi. So even though the opponent does still have quite a lot of cards, they're so far behind in terms of mana and in terms of their board development that I don't think it really matters, to be honest. Okay, they do have another Ingenious Smith, which, you know, is a concerning threat, but like I said, I think we're probably so far ahead at this point that it won't really matter. Okay, there is an Ornithopter, so that does buff the Esper Sentinel. And could be a concern if they have another Retrofitter Foundry, but either way we get to channel the Kaleem here, which then taps the Ingenious Smith, which we can then exile with the Wandering Emperor. So that's a pretty nice synergy. You know, Smith is a threat that we'd have to deal with eventually anyway, so might as well deal with it now before it starts getting out of control. Means we can attack him with the 2/2 here. And then I think I'm just going to main phase the Deluge here before the opponent has potential mana open for Metallic Rebuke. So definitely want to change the equation, and we've already got a Hall of Storm Giants, so I don't think we want another tapped land, and maybe, I mean, Field of Ruin and Island I think is close. I'm going to go for Field of Ruin just in case they're running some weird land, utility land, but for the most part Affinity doesn't really, so maybe it's better to get the Island there, but I don't think it should really end up mattering. So Change the Equation against this deck is only going to hit their 1 and 2 drops, so I think I might as well use it on Esper Sentinel now, because that is going to be an annoying card otherwise. Wow, they have a lot of artifact lands, which means if we can find another Purge, that's going to be really punishing. But either way, you know, we've got another Kaleem here. We could have potentially played the Hall of Storm Giants this turn, but I think I would rather Memory Deluge here while we've got the 7 mana. You know, if the opponent wants to hold open Metallic Rebuke mana, then that's fine. They're already really far behind on board, so that just limits their ability to develop even further. Okay, they find another artifact land, so I mean, if we can find a third Purge off this, I think the game is just over straight away, right? The ideal here would be Teferi and Divine Purge. Okay, we don't find the Teferi, but there's the third Divine Purge, so again, we're putting them all the way back to 2 lands again, so this has been a pretty brutal game. I kind of feel bad in a way. But yeah, we get to Purge here. I probably should have manually tapped the Field of Ruin, but I don't think it's really going to end up mattering. And then we make another token and just ship it back. Yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So that was kind of a slaughter, but when you draw 3 Purges against the artifact deck, that sort of thing is going to happen. So I think this is a matchup where Change the Equation isn't that great, and Mystical Dispute is generally better, and March of Otherworldly Light is also pretty nice here, right? It's very good at dealing with all their artifacts, also hits their artifact lands for 1 mana, which is pretty nice. I think we can afford to trim a Deluge here. I mean, maybe I'm supposed to cut more Change the Equations. I'm not 100% sure. I think it could be right to cut Change the Equations, but on the draw, I like keeping them in. You know, I'll trim 1, but I do like keeping them in to be able to stop their early plays like Ingenious Smith and Retrofitter Foundry. Now, having said that, they do typically cast those before we untap, so maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'm supposed to just completely Change the Equation here. But, you know, I feel like going second is very important to be able to, you know, slow them down a little bit. But, I mean, having said that, that could be wrong. I think there is definitely a good argument to Change the Equation in this matchup. So, yeah, if it does go to a Game 3, I think I probably will cut them entirely. But the main reason I wanted to keep them in here was just so we have counter spells open on, you know, going into the opponent's turn 3. Okay, so that's a pretty good start from the opponent. Just going to run out the Glacial Fortress here and pass. The other thing, yeah, thinking about it, I think I did miss sideboard, because there really aren't that many cards that Change the Equation hits that we care about too much, right? Like, you know, obviously it's good at hitting Esper Sentinel and Genius Smith and a bunch of their cheap cards, but when we are going second, you know, we're more worried about their 3 drops on curve, like Nettle Assist and stuff. I mean, having said that, we do get to snipe and Genius Smith. You know, this is the kind of thing that I wanted it in for, but I'm not sure that Change the Equation is that much better than some of the other cards we ended up cutting. You know, maybe it's better to have Supreme Verdict here. Yeah, think about it. I think I definitely did miss sideboard here. I should have Change the Equation and probably brought in Supreme Verdict, because then Verdict not only deals with more expensive cards that Divine Purge doesn't like, Thought Monitor, but it's also uncounterable, so it can't be hit by Metallic Rebuke either. So yeah, I did definitely sideboarded too quickly here, I think. Probably should have just cut the Change the Equations. Okay, interesting spot here. So I want to steal the Retrofitter Foundry with Archmage's Charm. So generally you'd want to do that now before they get the opportunity to make a 4/4, but if their last card is Thought Monitor, I really want to have Archmage's Charm to be able to counter it. Right, if they just go Thought Monitor, then that's a real nightmare for me, because we really don't want them to let them gain card advantage. So even though they do get a 4/4 out of this, I think it's best to wait, because we get so blown out if they have a Thought Monitor. And we have the March of Otherworldly Light in hand to deal with the 4/4 for 1 mana anyway, so... okay, last card's an Ottawara, and they don't choose to sack the Ornithopter, which is good news for us. So even though we would have preferred to get the Retrofitter Foundry, I think that's still a decent exchange for us. Now, missing the 5th land drop is a little bit rough, but we do have the Memory Deluge here. But we will have to give the opponent a draw off it, which isn't ideal either. But I still think it's worth it just to try and find a land and also to try and find a Divine Purge as well. The alternative isn't really that great, right? We could use March to get rid of Esper Sentinel, but we're not really developing that much. Giving the opponent an extra card here isn't ideal, obviously, but I think just to try and keep hitting land drops, it's very important. And then we can also, now we've triggered the Sentinel, we can also use this March to get rid of the Ornithopter before they can use the Retrofit Foundry to turn it into a 4/4. So even though that turn wasn't ideal, I still think it's correct just to keep developing mana, especially when we have 2 Teferis in hand here. Because getting stuck on 4 mana there is quite awkward. There's the Thought Monitor, so they could have potentially got that off the Esper Sentinel, which, obviously isn't great, but I still feel like just in terms of developing, that was probably worth going for. So here, I think I'm just going to jam Teferi, right? We are far, we're pretty far behind on boards that I think we can't afford to play around Metallic Rebuke at this point. And we do have the Kaleems in hand, so we can potentially just, tap down the Thought Monitor to stop them attacking the Teferi. So hopefully the Teferi should live this turn, unless they have a Nettle Cyst. Right, they make another counter off, a token off the Retrofit Foundry. And if we tap down the Thought Monitor, they're only attacking for 4 with the tokens. There's an Ingenious Smith, which is a bit of a concern for sure, but I think at this point my game plan is try and get Teferi to survive, use the Teferi loyalty to soak up some damage, and then if we can dig towards a Divine Purge, we just completely stabilize at this point, especially if Teferi's still alive. So we tap down the Thought Monitor so it's impossible for them to cleanly kill the Teferi. There is a chance they do just go face with the attack here. Well, they do. I mean... So we could use the Teferi to tuck the Thought Monitor, but I don't really think that's a winning play, particularly because they can still make a token off the Retrofit Foundry, which pumps the Ingenious Smith, and then we're staring down lethal anyway. Oh, okay, sick. I mean, I was going to say we can dig with the Kaleem, but we just drew the Archmage's Charm off the top. Definitely not going to play the Sentinel tax here because that both allows us to play around Archmage's Charm and... it allows us to play around Metallic Rebuke and still hold up Archmage's Charm. So that was obviously a lucky draw, but, I felt like, we still had another draw off the Kaleem, even if we didn't get there straight away. And, my out was Divine Purge, and we did have a lot of draws. So, I think I was fairly likely to find it in that sort of spot. So interesting spot here. I think there's definitely an argument to holding on to Archmage's Charm. Or there's definitely an argument to tapping down the Thought Monitor for sure. And there's definitely an argument to holding on to Archmage's Charm to try and counter another Thought Monitor. But in this spot, I really don't mind just using Archmage's Charm to steal the Esper Sentinel. Because that not only deals with the Sentinel, which is going to be an annoyance, but it also means the opponent has to constantly play around it here as well, which is going to be really awkward for them developing. Now, the drawback of that is that if they do have something like another Thought Monitor, we don't have a way to counter it, which is a bit of an issue, but I don't know. Yeah, maybe that was a bit of a greedy line, but I feel like even if they do have another Thought Monitor, we're in a really good spot here. They kind of have to attack down the Teferi here. I'm not going to attack with the Esper Sentinel just in case they have Ensoul Artifact. That could be a way we punt it if they just Ensoul Artifact their Artifact land. Okay, they go for Nettle Cyst. Probably have to play the Sentinel tax here because they know we've got a Kaleem on top. Again, not too worried about Nettle Cyst. The main thing we were worried about countering there was Thought Monitor. And it doesn't look like they've got that. They could potentially equip the Thought Monitor, but choose not to because I guess they think it's too risky to go all in there. So definitely going to tap down the Thought Monitor here. We get to bring back Kaleem from the graveyards. Okay, opponent just scoops it up. Sweet.